So as we jump into this new series, this idea of like, how do we build this firm foundation in our homes? I want us to start by looking at some pictures of a few homes together. We're gonna put this first one up here. It is a monster. Like, it is straight up a mansion. It feels like it should be in the TV show Downton Abbey. Anybody willing to say you watched all the episodes of Downton Abbey? Thank you. Another man in the back. I'll give you $20 later. Another man. Thank you, dudes. Ladies too, but kind of the guys are like, guys, watch that? I love every one of them. It feels like that's where that should be. Just honestly, just from watching all the episodes. I mean, look at how pristine that the ivy is over those archways. I mean, it is absolutely an incredible, incredible mansion. One family, right? Could you imagine the real estate listing looking for one family to move into this? But then look at the next one. It's even bigger. Maybe you could use the word gaudy, but hey, if it's yours, it is lovely. I mean, that thing is humongous. Like, I don't know what your end of night routine looks like. Amy and I will say, hey, it's time to shut it down. We know what that means. That means somebody's got to let the dogs out, let the dogs back in, get the dogs put away, brush your teeth, all that jazz that goes on. And you know, I looked at this and I thought, I'm going to need like an hour head start on the shut it down process if I have to turn out all the lights in that big mansion there. And gorgeous, incredible, incredible, incredible house. Take a look at this one. A little bit more modern. A lot going on there, right? Look at that lowest level, that basement level down there. It's not truly basement because it's not sub-ground, but look at all those vehicles, I think. And then scan up and to the left. Check out that helicopter. That's a helipad. Right? Now, I don't personally know anybody that owns any of these, right? And if you own one of these, if these are your homes and you're like, how'd they get a picture of my house? I'm slightly offended that I've never been invited. Obviously, I'm way down on your friend list, right? But when we talk about, hey, will you come over and let's have dinner? Or, hey, come over, I want to see if you could help me move a piano or whatever you ask somebody over for. We're generally not thinking of those houses, right? I mean, those are humongous. That's quite something. I think for all of us, when we think of, hey, come over to my house, we're expecting something that's going to feel more like this home here that, you know, was built maybe 10, 20 years ago. A nice new brick ranch. I think Dothan has a lot of these neighborhoods, right? Because as we grow, as our community grows, and as younger couples are coming in and they're going, we need a house. We've got to have a smaller option, and these are great. Now, some of you, a little older than me, or maybe my age, a little bit more nostalgic. Maybe for you, a house like this, a house built in the 80s, maybe a house built in the 90s, these colonials, right? Many of you may have lived in something like that. I grew up in something like that, but it was actually a split foyer. Like, whoever came up with that idea to build a house, not sure why. But maybe that's home to you. Maybe there's memories growing up, grandparents, visiting people of a house like that. Or I did put a picture, talk about a smaller house. I put a picture up of a home. Amy and I, we downsized when we moved to Dothan because our kids were both out of the house. And we live in a 1955 rancher, right? Love that thing. Love that house. You know, whatever house, when you think of houses, you know, how many of you, when you see one of those, it brings back, you're like, oh, that brings back, there's great memories. Or how many of you, like when you think about your home, have any of you like lived in your home longer than 15 years? Like, I can never get there. Look at that. Y'all are awesome. Y'all are way more stable than me. We just move and move and move. I think the ministry thing, you're like here and there. And yeah, that is so awesome. And you know, for any of you, have you remodeled? Anybody remodeled a home? How about built one from ground up? You know, I think Amy and I, one of the reasons we've still been happily married for 30 years is because we never remodeled a house, right? And we never built one from the ground up. You know, but when you look at all of these houses, and when you look at the houses you live in or the houses you drive by, there's big, there's small, there's different colors, different siding. There's all things that make houses different. That's why we all like them. We're like, oh, I like this about that house. But the reality is, when you look at houses, even those that we just saw on the screens, there's a lot in common, right? I mean, think about it. A house is a house at the end of the day. It just depends on what size it is. They all have a roof. They have a ceiling, right? They have windows. They have doors, bedrooms, bathrooms, kitchen, right? Now, your fancier ones, your bigger ones just have a bigger roof, a bigger ceiling, fancier windows, fancier, you know, they have all that, but they still have all of those things. But here's something that I'm venturing to guess, I'm gonna kind of step out on a limb right here. Even those big mansions that we saw up there, they probably still have a junk drawer in the kitchen. Anybody not have a junk drawer in the kitchen? Not have a junk drawer? We're batting 1,000. There you go. It's just a rite of passage, right? When we look at all these homes, any home you look at, there is one thing that has to be present in every single home. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what it looks like. Doesn't matter how it's built. There's one thing that every home must have, and that is a firm foundation. Regardless, there is nothing that you can build in regards to a home. Even I was up in Johnson City with our younger son and his wife, and he said, hey, Dad, will you help me build a retaining wall? And anytime he's like, will you say help? I'm like, yes. But as we talked about how he was going to build it and I was just going to carry around cinder block, the first thing that had to be processed out was the foundation. For a 4-foot retaining wall, for a building this big, right? The space that we own here is 125,000 square feet. When you think about the foundation, I bet none of you walked in this morning going, man, I hope there's a good foundation on that building, right? But underneath that little bitty tile that's underneath your feet right now is the foundation for this building. And just for clarity, our foundation, that is the lowest load-bearing level of any structure. If you turn behind you, you can see some huge I-beams, steel beams that run up and down. Those beams hold up the structure above it. But what holds it all together down below is the foundation that we have. And when you look at a foundation, whatever it's built in, there are the same basic ingredients in every concrete poured foundation. You're going to have cement, sand, gravel, crushed stone, water, and a little bit of air. The air makes a difference. When it's all mixed up, that air, crazy enough, makes a difference in how it solidifies. It's the same ingredients to every foundation. But here's the deal. If you ever have a foundation that's a bad foundation, a weak foundation, you'll know it because you'll start to see cracks in your walls, right? You'll start to see that when you go to open that door, it kind of sticks. You're like, boom. Those windows don't open the way they used to. There's a house that I was told not to buy that actually if you put a tennis ball on it, the floors sagged so much that it rolled away from wherever you put it. I saw pictures of where you can have a foundation that's so bad your chimney can fall off your house. So if your chimney's falling off your house, you probably need to call somebody to fix your foundation. Around here, because we don't really do basements, right? The sea level thing, it doesn't work out. But in homes that have basements, a bad foundation is going to cause a leaky basement. And ultimately, like in its worst case scenario, a foundation that's not taken care of, that nobody looks at, the entire home, the entire structure will fail. It collapses. It's done. It's over. As any of you have bought homes, looked at buying homes, have you ever went into a home and then you got the news that, hey, there's a foundation problem? Right? As soon as you hear that there's a foundation issue, even if you've never experienced it, as soon as you would hear that, you're like, I'm out of here. Right? You take off. You're like, nope, we're not seeing it. And heaven forbid if you saw it like on the inspection. Thankfully, you saw it on the inspection, right? And you can get out of that thing. Because the thing is, when it comes to a foundation, that foundation doesn't care. That foundation does not care what home is built on top of it. It doesn't care if that home is on the most fancy, well-known, most desired street in the town or community. It just knows it's weak. That foundation, it doesn't care who's lived in that house before. It doesn't care who lives in that house now. It doesn't care of great parties or events or birthday celebration or Christmas or anything that's been celebrated in that home. That foundation does not care. All it knows is it's weak. And when we have an inadequate foundation in a home, the reality for that home is it never reaches its full potential. The hopes, the dreams, right? Imagine this building here. Imagine all of a sudden we had a big, huge foundation issue. The hopes and dreams that we have for this space and what goes on here on a Sunday morning would never be experienced. because there's a bad foundation. What we would hope the impact, what we would hope to do for others could never be a part of our reality. Ultimately, when the foundation is faulty, the building fails. Now, as we think about your home, you think about a structure, you're thinking more about your foundation now than maybe you ever have in a long time. Shift your thinking a little bit. And I want to process us through the reality that personally, we're all built on some foundation. And the reality is we are like the house, and the foundation that we're on has as much impact on us as one would for this structure. Right? Regardless of what you may believe about Jesus, or we're gonna dive in and look at a specific story that talks about this. You may go, I don't believe it, because you're gonna read it from the Bible, and hey, we're glad you're here, we're glad you're online. But here's what I believe is true for all of us. We're all grounded in something. Right? What I also know that's true about all of us is we get to choose what we're grounded in. We get to choose what our foundation is. And the reality for a home and for us is that when we have a weak foundation, we will not handle the storms of life. They're going to come. A strong foundation or a weak foundation, the storms of life are going to come. Your home, the storms are going to come. If your foundation in your home is weak, it could lead to ultimate failure. If the foundation in our life is weak, it can lead to ultimate failure. This is one of the very reasons that we're diving into this series called Solid Ground. What we want to look at is what does it take to create a firm foundation so that we can then build upon that, so that in our homes and in our lives, we can rest assured that we are standing on solid ground. That's what we're going to be exploring. That's what we're going to be discovering together over the next several weeks. We're going to pick some specific areas. Actually, we've already picked them. We've already got it planned out, but I'm not going to tell you what they are, so you just keep coming back. But we've got it planned out for specific areas in our life where we're going to look at and dig deep. What does it mean to create this firm foundation and build our life up on that as we live in this world where the storms are never going to stop? So today, what we're going to look at specifically is what's required to even get the foundation, right? Because there's no need to jump and talk about all the things to build on top of the foundation until we talk about how do we create our foundation. What we're going to look at is we're going to look at a teaching from Jesus. The thing I love is that when we dig into things like this, we don't have to stand up here and make up what we think is truth. The beautiful thing is when we look at Scripture, when we look at the stories, when we look at the letters that are in the Bible, the beautiful thing is there's answers here to everything that we walk through in life. Those who this were written to in their time, they were different in us in that they lived in a different time and didn't have all of our technology and all of those things, but they walked through the hardships in life together. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at today the end of Jesus's first publicly recorded message. Now, it's important to say publicly recorded because actually we know that Jesus at age 12 was teaching in the synagogue. But we didn't get that one written down. This is the first one. We're going to be in the book of Matthew. We're going to look at what Matthew captured from Jesus' actual teachings. Now, we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. Some of you who are new here, you're like, are we going to go through all that? I did not bring lunch. We're not. But that's where it's all pulling from. Matthew 5, 6, and chapter 7. Chapter 5, 6, and 7. That's called the Sermon on the Mount. That's when Jesus stood on a mountain and preached a sermon. They got really creative with that name. Right? They stood on a mountain. He preached a sermon to people much like us who were saying, what does it mean to follow Jesus? Even if you put your trust in Jesus a long time ago, we're still asking the question, how do I continue to follow you in a world that keeps changing, in a world that keeps making all the other options look way more better than what I read here, right? So we're going to dig into this. We're going to look at the teachings. I'm going to talk about a bit about the teachings that Jesus shared, and there were 18 of them. The thing when Jesus shared with those people on the mountain, he talked about why he came, why Jesus came. He talked about love, compassion, judgment. He talked about material possessions, because that's a part of life as well. He talked about relationships. He talked about judgment. And in these things, like if you've never read Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, I would encourage you during the halftime of one of today's football games, open it up and read as far as you can. And just read it. And go, okay, what was it that he was trying to teach everyone to do in that moment through his teachings? If you're new to church, or if you're like, I don't know that I believe all this. Scholars have reviewed Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. I'm going to say that so much, you're going to be like, I know Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7. That's the Sermon on the Mount. People that would say they do not believe what I believe about who Jesus is and what many of you believe have looked at this and called it one of the greatest moral discourses of its time, one that's ever been captured. A moral discourse is when someone has a conversation talking about moral issues, talking about what's right and what's wrong, trying to help people understand what it means to follow what is right. And in this case, come to an understanding and live a more godly life. People who've read this over and over and over see it as an incredible, incredible piece of literature. We believe there's way more to it than that. But for some of you, maybe that's where you need to jump in and just read it as an incredible moral discourse and begin to see what does that look like and how does it apply to you. So here's where we're going to jump in. We're going to look at how Jesus concluded the Sermon on the Mount. What chapters is that? 5, 6, and 7. Thank you. We're going to look at what he said, because think about it. If it was his first public message, not only did he put thought into what he was going to say, but also how to wrap this thing up. If you've ever spoken, presented, done a lecture, done training, you want to make sure everybody walks away nodding their head like this, knowing what they're supposed to do. So Jesus put intentional time. It's so thought out. It's so practical. And I love the fact that it is simple. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what did Jesus say to those who he shared these teachings with, and then for us, how does that impact the foundation that we have a choice? I love about this. You have a choice. You don't have to do any of this, but we all have a choice as we build a foundation that we live our life on. So I'm going to jump into Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. Jesus starts with the first word. He says, therefore, or he could have said, in conclusion, therefore, everyone, that was everybody sitting out in front of him, who hears these words of mine, that all just heard it. That all just heard, and they're like, okay, that's me. I just heard all your words. He says, and puts them into practice, is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Now, what Jesus does to wrap up these 18 teachings that he just delivered, in order to close it up, he presents them with a parable. He teaches a parable at the end. Now, a parable is not a true story. It's a fictitious story that's made up in order to prove a point. Now, and you can still use it in teaching today. Jesus used it, and he would make an earthly point. In this case, he's talking about building, talking about how someone builds a house. And everyone there is going, oh, okay, we get that. They're all shaking their head. They're all hearing that, okay, whoever hears these words of mine, right? And then he jumped in. The thing is, Jesus, if you read all of his teachings, he used parables 35 times. He loved to teach this way because it led to deeper discussion. It led them to think more and ultimately move closer to him. You know, as we look at what he said, I love how it's very linear. I'm a linear thinker. It's in actual steps. The first he says is to everyone who hears these words of mine. So step one was to listen. The beauty is we all can listen, right? The beauty is none of us are lacking information. Information is everywhere, right? But he says anyone who hears these words of whose? Of his. He said of mine. It's not the words that the world throws at us. It's not what you heard somebody over here say or a podcast say or maybe even a book you read. What he is saying to them is that anyone who hears, step one, these words of mine. And then step two, what are we to do? And puts them into practice. Right? If you have a dog or a pet, have you ever had a dog or a pet? Have you ever talked to them and you know they hear you because they're looking at you? And then how do you feel when they do not put that command that you've given them 100 times into practice? I'm frustrated with my dogs when they do that, right? I'm not saying we're dogs, right? But I am saying I've got a feeling as Jesus shared this, he's like, what's wrong that you don't put these into practice? Right? He's saying step one, you got to hear. Step two, you got to put it into practice. Step three, what happens? When you put it into practice, oh my goodness, we get wise. We've been talking about this. All we have to do is ask God for wisdom. What he's saying again in a different place, Jesus is saying, if you'll just hear me, you'll put it into practice, then you will be wise. And then the next step is the decision that you make. Internalize that for a minute. If you know you've got to make a big decision, listen to God, put it into practice, you'll be wiser, and then make a decision. And in this case, what did the wise man do? He built his house on the rock. In this parable, Jesus doesn't stop there, but everybody's doing just what you're doing. I got it. I understand it. I've heard this before. Jesus added on what I call a multiplier. At that point, he said, okay, you've built your house, but I'm about to give you something that's going to make it worse. He goes on. He says, then the rain came down. The streams rose, the winds blew, and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Many of you, you're like, I've heard that over and over, right? And you're like, yes, what are we to do? We're to build our house on a firm foundation. It's all about the foundation. It's about the foundation, right? And his house, it stood firm. So he gave everyone that first part of the parable. Then he continues in verse 26. He goes to the other side. He says, but, so I'm going to show you a contrast, but everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. At that point, everyone is sitting out there just like you, and they're going, oh, that's not good. That's not going to work. And that's what he wanted. He wanted everybody in their parable to be going, okay, I'm tracking, but they're not thinking about themselves at this point, right? They're just thinking this is another teaching. You and I get the heads up. We can begin to see that, oh, this is about us. Oh, we're in the story. Oh, we're the smart, we're the wise one, or we're the fool. And we hear in this that the fool, what he did is he decided to build his house on the sand because he heard, right? But he didn't put it into practice. Then who did he become? The fool. And then what happened? He made an action step. Right? Just like in the first part of the parable, Jesus finishes it on out. Just like many movies that you watch, you're like, I know how this thing's going to end. Right? But I'm going to go ahead and read it because we know how it's going to end. He says, then the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. I can only imagine just a boom, how that thing hit the ground. For many, maybe when you were taught this as a kid, there's a song that goes with it. I'm not going to sing it. There was a song, and what I took away from that was, you've got to build your house on a good foundation. Build on a good foundation. Build on a good foundation. But really, the build on a good foundation is really step 4, right? Because you either become wise or foolish, and then you build. The reality of this parable and what Jesus was teaching them and what Jesus wants us to see as we think about his teachings, as we think about building this foundation that we build our life upon, like we just sang in the song, Jesus' point wasn't about the building code. It wasn't about what's best practices for building. That's step 4. What Jesus wanted us to see, the point of this parable, and it's so simple, is back at step number 2. right? Because step number 2 focuses on obedience or disobedience, right? This parable is about, do we obey or do we not obey? When you look at verse 24, we're going to reread verse 24. It says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, right? That's the wise. That's one choice we all have. And today we're hearing words. All of us are hearing words. We have a choice to take what we hear today and be wise. Or we can follow verse 26. It's your choice, right? It says, but those who hear these words of mine and does not put them into action, right? That's the other choice. Today, when you leave here, when I leave here, anybody that watches this online, from however long ago, however long that will be, we always have a choice. You're never stuck. And we either choose, do I put them into practice or do I not? Because just like the wise man and the foolish man, all of us hear. We hear. Today you're hearing. Today we have information. Today we have a choice. We can either obey, and in the parable, the one who obeyed and followed Jesus had success. Or we can choose to disobey. And the fool, his house came down with a great crash. When we talk about obeying, when we talk about our firm foundation, what is it that we're actually obeying? What did the wise man actually obey? What he obeyed are Jesus' teachings. In this case, there were 18 of them that Jesus had just shared. Imagine that. You heard Jesus, and we don't know if he talked for 2 hours or 2 days. Many of them couldn't write. They didn't have any electronic device. They couldn't use AI to capture everything he said. They just had to remember it and then share it with one another. We have the benefit when we talk about creating our firm foundation, not just based on the 18 teachings that are in the Sermon on the Mount. We have all of Jesus' teachings. And we have a choice. See, our firm foundation, it's not made with cement and sand, rock, crushed stone, water. No, our firm foundation. When we've chosen, we've said, hey, I'm going to put my trust in Jesus. Our firm foundation, the ingredients are Jesus' teachings. That's what our foundation is made up of. When you think about your foundation, when you think about this foundation, think about the wise man as he sat in his house, right? It's a made-up story, but just walk with it. He knows his foundation is in his heavenly Father. He knows it's in his teachings. He knows the decisions he's made have him grounded. He's standing on solid ground. And the wise man, the storms are coming out. And remember, just because we put our trust in Jesus doesn't mean the storms stop. It just means we have a firm foundation. And what that wise man could do as those storms come at him, this sounds crazy, but he experiences freedom. The storms are still there, but we can experience freedom when our foundation is firmly set in the teachings of Jesus and we choose to follow them. Is that easy? No. Does everybody get it right? No. But is it the target? Yes. What we want to do here as we gather up is to say, what's the target? What are we shooting for? Because we all fall short. But ultimately, our freedom, it's found in following Jesus. That's where our freedom is found. When the storms of life come at us, I would rather be sitting with the wise man, knowing my foundation is firmly planted in Jesus' teaching, versus having the storms come at me and I'm the fool and my foundation is on sandy ground. And now I'm scared to death. I'm anxious. I'm nervous. I'm worrying. I'm running. I'm anything I can do. It is not good. We have a choice. You have a choice. even at times, when you would say, hey, I've put my trust in Jesus, sometimes what we do is we still look at the foundation around us and we're like, I'm standing in it, but we begin to look at everything that's around us. We look at what the world throws at us on the perimeter of this firm foundation. And many times what we end up doing is we end up saying, well, I think this will give me more freedom. And we reach out and we just touch it just for a second. We're like, I think this will be better. And we touch it, we're like, come on, please. And then we come back into our firm foundation. Or maybe at times we're like, we reach out there and we just grab hold of it. We're like, this is going to be better. This is going to be better than trusting in who Jesus is. Think about it. He's our creator. And in these teachings in the Sermon on the Mount, what he was sharing was, what does it look like to follow me, is what he's saying. So what do we do with this? I want to encourage some of you. If you're in that camp where you're like, I don't know, I just see it as a great moral discourse. Well, then go home and read it. And ask yourself this question. Would you and your life be better if you followed the teachings in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. I got to keep you all awake. Ask yourself, would the world around me be better if we followed Jesus' teachings in Matthew 5, 6, and 7? Would your community be better? Would your workplace be better? You don't have to believe in who Jesus is. Just read it and look at it and go, would we be better if we did that? I'm heavily biased. I believe we would. There's others of you who you would say, hey, I've put my trust in Jesus, but I'm really having a tough time right now. And I get that. We all have tough times. Remember, the storms don't go away. Here's what I want to encourage you to do. Evaluate your own life. Look at your foundation. Where have you reached outside and you're holding on? Maybe you're just touching it, or maybe you're holding on to it, or maybe you've got one foot out, or maybe you have both feet out. What is that area in your life where you truly are not trusting the teachings of Jesus to be your firm foundation? And then I encourage you to take a step. Sometimes you just need to go, man, how did I get here? Acknowledge that you're there and let it go and step back in. When you put your trust in Jesus, you said, I give all. I trust you all the way. Come back to what it is you know that you trust. For each of us, our freedom is found when we follow Jesus. That's where our freedom is found. And when we can trust and we see the storms coming at us and we know our foundation is firm, then we begin to experience things like peace. We begin to experience the assurance of who God is. We begin to experience hope because we know who our hope is grounded in. We begin maybe to experience joy for the first time, or maybe for some, it's a renewed sense of joy. Because if you're honest, someone stole the J out of your joy a long time ago, and you've been searching for it. And maybe it starts by realizing that your foundation is built in the teachings of who Jesus is, and we begin to live there. Imagine getting back to that place. It's possible. And we all have a choice. It's up to you. You're not stuck where you are. Your Heavenly Father hasn't moved. He's just waiting on us to come back to him. Let me pray for us. God, this morning, I thank you that you didn't leave us stuck. God, we all have our challenges. We all have our issues. We all have stuff. But God, thank you for sending your son, Jesus. Thank you that we have his teachings. God, thank you that they still apply in our life. God, I pray today for everyone in this room, everyone watching online, or whenever they see this, God, that give us all the courage to do something with what we've heard. Give us the courage to put these words into practice. And God, we thank you in advance for the freedom that we will experience when we do. And I pray these things in your Son's name. Amen.